morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around this beautiful, beautiful world. Today I have a very, very special guest, Dr. Jacqueline Kerr, as she is absolutely amazing scientist. She's a behavior change scientist. Recently, she gave an amazing TEDx talk. Please go and watch it. I put it in the description right here. She's also a writer, a mompreneur, a mentor, and a burnout survivor. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jacqueline Kerr.
Thanks so much for having me, Billy, and thank you so much for all your support during this process. I've really appreciated it.
My absolute pleasure. For all of you watching it right now, Dr. Jacqueline Kerr is in the top 1% of the most cited scientists worldwide. That's why it's huge to have her on the show right now. I'm so excited. So let's start with this. How you feel as right now you are a TEDx speaker?
Thank you so much. Yes, it's so interesting. One of the things I learned in my journey is to have two emotions at once. So I'm definitely really excited about the opportunity that this was, the honor it was. I mean, when you step onto that TEDx stage, the emotions, like it was one of the hardest things for me to do. Just like, the red dot is there and I kept going, go onto it. And I was like, I couldn't almost bring myself to do it. I was so surprised to be that overwhelmed with emotions because, I'm a professor. I've been a speaker and a lecturer for decades. I started public speaking when I was 10 years old. So, it's not something that I'm nervous about, but the emotion, it meant so much. And then the other people on the talk, I mean, such amazing talks, such powerful talks, that it really was an honor to share the stage with them. And for me, the reason I did my TEDx talk was to reach as many people as possible in a format that I'm comfortable with. I do definitely struggle with social media. Again, as a professor, it's not something that we had to do in our profession. In fact, we like to keep ourselves private, actually, so that, not necessarily the students know everything about our lives. And so stepping into social media was a big thing for me and quite fear-inducing as well. So I felt good on the TEDx stage, right? In comparison, that was where I felt good. And then the comments that I've had, so many moms have reached out to me and said that they feel seen. So, I mean, that is just so valuable. I'm so glad the talk is allowing people to have new conversations, because literally I was texting with an old friend and she admitted what she was going through, and we hadn't had that conversation at all before. So it's so amazing when you admit your own struggles, how many people can then feel safe to admit theirs. And that's actually such an important lesson here. Psychological safety in the workplace comes when especially leaders admit their own struggles, and then that gives permission for others to share, as long as it's accompanied by like really good active listening and then compassion. And for me, the compassion is not just, oh, I can see what you're going through. Compassion is when you act upon that and say, okay, what can I do real action to support you in this moment. So yeah, I think stories and sharing your struggles are just so vital.
Absolutely. That actually leads me to my next question, because burnout has been like a huge topic lately. As you all know, listening this month, May is almost the end of May, but it's the mental health awareness. And I think there's no coincidence in our life, I believe, but to have the Dr. Jacqueline Kerr TEDx talk to be published in May in the month of mental health awareness was huge. So tell us, how do you spot burnout in companies, employees, and environment, in professional business environment?
Right. And let me just say, because it's been a really tough week. We've had 3 mass shootings here in the US. And so one of the types of burnout that I mentioned in my talk is emotional burnout. And I'm not an expert in that area, but when people are just feeling so exhausted and drained by the emotions, the big emotions they're having due to these traumatic events, And to be honest, that sort of exhaustion due to the stress of COVID, I mean, burnout is chronic stress. And so it's this repeated exposure to traumatic events that can lead to that. But my main focus and what I experienced was workplace burnout and parental burnout. And so those kind of are combined too, because if you're having stress and being stressed at home, and then obviously then you're turning up to work not fully energized and not ready to work, and then the workplace can also be a source of stress. And so burnout is that constant stress. So one way to spot it in your employees, there's a couple of different ways. I have 4 ways that I specifically talk about for people. So the first one is behaviors. So often burnout is accompanied by behavior change, strange behavior change. Now, some of that could be, for example, addictive behaviors, coping behaviors, alcohol, eating, even healthy behaviors that become a bit obsessive, like over-exercising, for example. So those are sort of some that we think about as coping behaviors. But people can just start acting differently. And that's when you start to really notice it. If you've had an employee that previously was always super positive, super efficient, and suddenly that changes, that's really the opportunity not to chastise them for suddenly not showing up like they used to, but it's an opportunity to say, what's going on? So essentially, employees being exhausted, they may get quiet, but they also, burnout brings cynicism. And so they may start sort of eye rolling or showing frustration at really small things, even sort of gossiping, something you just don't want to be part of this system. So those behaviors can be sort of strange because they appear as negative behaviors, but actually they're masking the frustration and the exhaustion and the cynicism that comes with burnout. So that's the first way, is to look for behavior changes. The second way is certain personality types are more likely to burn out. So if you've got, we all love our high achiever driven workers. They bring so much to our organization, also our passionate workers. But they're the ones that are also likely to burn out if you don't help them with upper limits on what they do. So perfectionists, altruists, overachievers, you know who they are because you love them, right? You know how much they bring for you, but you've really got to help them see what are reasonable expectations. The third step I say is look for your disadvantaged groups. So in the Freudenberger and North's, they have this 12 stages of burnout. So the 8th stage was those behavior changes. But why wait to stage 8 of 12 to spot something? The people coming in are the ones that are going to have to prove themselves. That's step 1, and that's your perfectionist. But there's also groups of people who have to reprove themselves. So there's so much research saying that women of color constantly are having to reprove themselves. And the assumption is that they're not competent. Mothers are constantly having to reprove themselves because the assumption is they're not committed to their work. Women, for example, research shows even though we can have a fantastic performance record, the assumption is that we don't have the same potential. And so all these situations lead to us not having equal pay, equal promotions. So if you don't have equal representation from all your minority groups in your organization, then the chances are they are struggling to get to the top. There are barriers in those ways. And that lack of reward and that bias and injustice, that's what leads to burnout. So look for it in those groups that aren't in power, that aren't being represented. And then the last one really comes down to, number 4 comes down to, what are the conditions? So rather than trying to work out what's in everybody else's problem, I always say that when you point to everyone else as the problem, there's three fingers pointing back to yourself, right? So, their personality, their behaviors, their grouping, right? 3 back to you, which is what conditions do you have in your company that might be causing the burnout? Because those you can see and know more easily than trying to guess if somebody else is struggling. So those are lack of autonomy, lack of flexibility, the lack of reward and bias that I've already mentioned. And those things then lead to relationship conflicts, value conflicts, and that lack of psychological safety that I started out speaking about. So you can spot those things. I recently saw on LinkedIn somebody saying that they shared a leader shared his struggles and asked if anyone else in the room was experiencing the same, and nobody spoke up. Then there's not psychological safety here.
Yeah.
People don't feel safe yet to speak up. So definitely sharing your story is the first step, but there has to be more trust than that. So yeah, that all those are indicators.
That's a great lecture, and I could spot a lot of burnouts around me, so I can speak with the people and just try to help them. And what from my experience, I think people when they hear burnout, because it kind of take that kind of first step to say, yes, I do go through a burnout and I need to do something about it. But what I really like about your TEDx talk and all the topics what you speak on your podcast, we're going to speak about this in a minute. But what I really like about is that the majority of the people talk about self-care. And it's like a huge what to do to do all the self-care, where it's a completely different approach as talking about behavior change and burnout. The first time when I heard about this, I was like, my brain couldn't link together the behavior change and burnout. And I was like, that's very strange to put them together even in one sentence, right? Because we're like self-care. So talk us about this, like why behavior change can help burnout.
Mm-hmm. And just back to what you mentioned, when you recognize, say, a personality type that you have, it's so important because you will take that personality type to every part of your life. So I discovered I was a perfectionist. So I bring that to my office and to my parenting. So no wonder I'm struggling in both. But if you change jobs and then you take the same need to prove yourself with you, then you're going to have the same problems. So there is always that important part of recognizing what you bring. And I always talk about it as like a person environment fit. So I think that really links in importantly to your question is, what is self-care? So with burnout, we definitely have to recognize that we are bringing some part to that table. So if, for example, we weren't looking after our health at all, then that is definitely one step to say, well, could I turn up more healthy so that I can cope with the stresses at work? Or can I turn up having had more professional and personal development help from a coach so that I can manage my expectations, so that I can feel like I'm enough, so I can have self-worth in these places that we go to work. So those are all really important. So to me, like if self-care is sort of personal, professional development, I really recommend that. And I recommend coaching. Absolutely. It's so vital because you just can't see what you can't see. And coaches provide that perspective. But definitely recently, a leader in a large organization was saying, what you need to do is eat 3 meals a day, exercise, and sleep. And I was like, I mean, I've spent my whole career as a public health researcher. My specialty was exercise. You know what? Most people are not exercising, meeting guidelines. It's less than 10%. So you're asking people to do something that is actually really difficult to do. So that's one thing. And even if people start to build a meditation habit or an exercise habit, Most of those people don't keep going for very long. And we know that even from like our Fitbits and our apps, we know the data. After 6 months, people lose engagement with those tech tools. So it's not a long-term solution, right? I mean, I want to help people do healthy behaviors, but it's not just this like, oh, do this and you'll be fine, because even those behaviors are really, really challenging to maintain long term. And that's the important thing. Burnout is chronic stress. So yes, it can help us cope. It can help us gain control of the situation if that situation feels out of control. And it's so empowering. So understanding that how we respond to the stress in our coping skills, how we process the stress. For example, physical activity can help us get that stress out of our bodies. We shouldn't be sitting down taking our stress. Evolutionary, we were running to get rid of the stress of being hunted, for example. So taking our stress sitting down is so important. And even I share in my TEDx talk about my husband's really badly broken leg. And that night when I got a call at like 11 o'clock at night, and he was in the hospital, he was out of town and had this accident, broke his leg. I left the house and went out the front door. The kids are asleep in bed. And I walked around my cul-de-sac. And I could feel that stress and that like fight or flight response leave my body. So yes, it is so important. But it's not a solution for long-term stress. And that's really where we have to transition and say, what is the cause of this stress? So if the cause of this stress is the workplace, then we really need to look at that and say, what are those conditions that I mentioned? Lack of autonomy, lack of flexibility, etc., lack of fair pay, that is causing this stress. So I totally understand when I start to say to people, this is a systemic problem. This is something to change in the system. Then people sort of feel, well, that's out of my control. I don't want to be a victim of that system. And I totally understand that. We need to feel in control, and that's so empowering to feel in control. And two, when you're a victim of that system, you're so exhausted. It's really hard as the abused to become the advocate. So that's also not what I'm suggesting. But recognizing that the environment is influencing how you feel, not just the work environment, but for mothers, the social expectations of being this perfect mother, those are really hard. So when you start to go, it's not all my fault, I'm not entirely to blame here, you can have a little more self-compassion. And you can also go, if it's not just me, I'm not alone in this. Like when you think it's your own fault and self-care is the answer, it very much feels like something's wrong with you as an individual. Whereas actually so many mums, so many leaders, so many people are going through burnout. You are not alone. So then how do we change this system? And so actually systems are just decision makers. Systems are people. People are decision makers. And it's about, will we make the decisions to make well-being and mental health a priority for our company? If we make mental health and well-being a key performance indicator, we know what happens when companies select their key performance indicators. All parts of that company work together to make that change. If the board is saying well-being in this company is important for us, we are going to keep you as the CEO accountable for that. If the CEO is saying well-being is important, I'm going to role model well-being so that others know exactly what this company is about. And so role modeling that is having reasonable working hours and not sending emails out of hours, and thinking about the groups that are struggling. And, do we have meetings outside school pickup times? How can we focus on our productivity in a way that we're really going for what are the most impactful things we can do? and attending multiple meetings may not be the thing, or working on these side issues is not impacting the bottom line. So really focusing on that bottom line, and then recognizing that for people to do good work, they need flow. They need times with no interruption. They need meeting-free Fridays so that they can totally actually focus and have some sense of achievement and efficiency. So then all those things start to actually shape the culture of the organization. And then we really have to get into some of the policies and systems. So for example, if you have a policy of taking unlimited paid time off, but there's another policy in the company that gets in the way and stops you being able to do that freely, it's okay to say it's a policy, but if you can't enact it. So that's one of the things you have to look at, your data. How many people are actually taking these days off, using this policy? And so it's not about just sort of saying, oh, we believe in this. It's actually measuring, did you make a difference in people's lives? And what got in the way? What were the barriers that the people couldn't enact this policy? And they could be personal, but they can be environmental too. And then really changing those hiring and promotion systems. That's so important. And we have so much evidence about what to do there. So for example, self-appraisals are not valid tools to say who should be promoted. Unstructured interviews for promotion or hiring is not a fair and reliable way. Depending on one manager to make these decisions, that manager, male or female, comes with so many ingrained biases that you need a team to make the decision, because then the team will at least hopefully spot those biases. And then if you have objective criteria that you actually say, do they meet these criteria? Not, oh, I really like them and they'll fit into this corporation, they'll fit into our climate. Because if they do the fit, it means that they look like you and they are like you. And if we don't have diversity in our corporations, then we don't have the collective intelligence that it takes. We don't have the innovation. Because as a recent podcast guest of mine was saying, when we were thinking about women in STEM and women in science, it's if you have a question that you're trying to solve in science and everyone has a similar point of view, then you'll get kind of one answer to that question. Whereas imagine if you bring 10 different, totally diverse voices, you'll have so many different ideas of how you can solve those problems. So diversity is so important. It increases our profitability. So yes, absolutely, all those things. Now, there still are challenging things to do, like how do you implement new systems? And that's when behavior change. So sometimes you can design things and not really have behavior change be part of it in terms of what does a person have to do. So imagine, you know how when you go into a hotel room, you have a key card that you put in and the lights come on. And then when you leave the room, you take the key card and the lights turn off. That's a system level change. You didn't even have to do anything, right? But sometimes we can't design things. So that's when if you have a hiring system that you abide by, you don't keep saying, oh no, we'll make this exception, then that can help you just follow those steps. But so often we have to remember, how do we remember not to send an email after hours? How do we remember not to schedule a meeting at certain times? So again, some of the tech systems can help us with that, but we need cues to remind us. We need to practice. We need to, as women, practice, stepping up and standing up when an assumption is made about you as a mother that would never be made about a dad. You have to practice being able to say, would you say that to a dad? And questions are such a fantastic way to approach people without them getting defensive. And it also puts the question, rather than you having to defend your point of view, it makes the other person on the receiving end of thinking about, well, what is about my behavior? So there's so many tools there. Go ahead, Billy.
I love it, totally loving it. And for all of you watching it right now who are decision makers in your company, please, please, please go and watch the TED Talk of Dr. Jacqueline Kerr, because you're going to hear, she mentioned just few solutions which are so easy to implement, I have to say. And if you don't mind, I will share my own experience. But guys, you're going to hear so many different solutions which are super easy to implement, and the results are going to be huge. And I want to share my own experience. Now I'm listening and I'm like, oh my God, I did that actually. Well, I was kind of forced to do it. So 2011, I went to work in Monaco for about 3.5 years. And in France and Monaco, I don't know if you know that, but France and Monaco, mothers, actually not women, but mothers don't work on Wednesdays, simply because the schools are closed on Wednesdays. So the schools are open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's it. But Wednesday, it's kind of the day when kids do whatever they want. And sometimes they're with their grandparents, but most of the time they have to have one of the parents to be with the kids, obviously. Usually these are moms, obviously, and this is their sport day. They're like, kids are super happy on Wednesdays, I can tell you. But now I was a director at that time, and my whole team was a mixture of like very international team, I have to say. And I had one mother who did not work on Wednesdays, and typical me coming from England, I just schedule meetings during the week, like Monday to Friday. And at the beginning, bless her, she was so frustrated with me, but very patient, I have to say. And on Wednesday, I was like, where is Caroline? Where is Caroline? And everyone was like, it's Wednesday today. And at the beginning, I was like, so what? It's Wednesday today, so what? And I think somewhere around week 2 or week 3, I learned the lesson to not put meetings on Wednesdays if I want my team to be together and discuss like quite important things. There was like a lot of projects going on, a lot of work. But let me tell you, just to share my experience, because on Wednesday I took off all the company team meetings. And it was kind of, we did not have that many meetings within my team, internal meetings, but we had only meetings with the other departments we were working. But because the other departments also have mothers, we kind of skipped Wednesday meetings. And it taught me something very valuable. It taught me that if I have one day in the week where we don't have any meetings, we actually worked a lot more, and we had a very productive day and a very productive week. So that was a high value lesson, I have to say, on this one. So if you are a decision maker, go and watch the TED Talk of Dr. Jacqueline Kerr, because you're going to hear a lot of those. Hope my experience, what I shared, did help you as well. So let's just talk about your TED Talk quickly. Some people think that it's very difficult to do a TED Talk, and land like a safer spot on TEDx stage. Some people think like, yeah, that's very easy. I can do it very quickly. What was your journey? What was your experience?
Yeah. So when I decided that, I'm really trying to get this message out about burnout and how much people are struggling, but there are solutions, and that self-care isn't the solution. For me, thinking about, I want to reach as many people as possible with that message. So that's where TED and TEDx has such a great credibility and a great platform and wide reach. So that was one reason I wanted to do TED, really to reach as many people as possible with this message. But for me, it wasn't frightening in terms of, like I'd said at the beginning, I've delivered talks for years and years. I actually, as part of my burnout recovery, did a stand-up comedy show as well. So I learned how to write jokes.
I love it.
I'm a writer, so I love writing, and I just discovered I like writing jokes too. There's a formula to it, and you just keep working on it and working on it. And that was a part of my burnout recovery, because actually that class was like therapy. We laughed so hard. We all got our emotions out. So yeah, so I had done that. And again, not nervous stepping onto a stage. That was the first time I really had to memorize something for quite a long period of time. Because when I give my lectures and other talks, I'm really just talking about my science, and, I'm prepared, but I'm not, memorizing it. So even that part, I was like, okay, I have memorized my stand-up routine. I think I can memorize this talk. But I really did spend, more than 6 months crafting the talk, getting lots of feedback, learning all sorts of new tools about my physical presence, how I could move differently to bring a different presence. And I know you post about those types of things. And, sharing my personal story, that was hard, that was emotional, but so important. And again, often in science, you don't get to bring that side of you, or as a professor. So that was definitely new for me, but something I'd already been doing in my podcast, and something I was starting to get comfortable doing. One of my favorite things was finding an analogy. I know an analogy is, bless you, is so important in a TEDx talk, and especially when you're talking about complicated things like burnout. You want to make it easy for people to kind of understand. And it's a heavy topic too. So I wanted some lightness in there as well. So the analogy I have is that burnout is a bit like being a baked Alaska, where you're protecting this delicious ice cream in the middle, but you're being blowtorched to perfection on the outside. And then all the layers of the baked Alaska, the cake, the ice cream, the fruit, the meringue, those are all the layers in society that influence us. And I had watched TED Talks, and actually I had been to TED Women in 2021, and I had really studied the women on stage and the techniques they were using to engage me. And analogies are so helpful. I love those what if questions as well. What if? And that's rhetorical questions. And I studied that back in the day. I did Latin in high school, and we studied all the ancient writers and speakers. And we always studied, like, what are their tools? So it was so funny to, like, bring that knowledge from high school back in to go, okay, how can I do the best talk possible? So yeah, no, as I say, I feel like I'm a pretty experienced speaker, and I learned so much about this process. And I think, like, one of the things you post about too is it's really a place where anyone in the world can step on to that stage. So there's an equality of sharing our knowledge. And I really think that's so important. So I really feel like, I know, as I say, I've got experience, and, I've got the PhD letters after my name, but I value the talks of people that are talking about their life and what they actually learned, because real life learning is so important. So I say anyone can do this. Really, it is a process, like a process to apply and a process to practice. But if you have people that can give you feedback and you go through that process, yeah, I think anyone can come out and have their voice heard. It's so important.
You heard that, right, guys? If
Billy
you
can help
always
you.
want
Billy can help you.
you always wanted to do a TEDx talk, just do it. It will take time, be patient, but
Yes.
totally worth, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, totally worth
Tell us quickly about your podcast, which is absolutely amazing, and tell us what is next for Dr. Jacqueline Kerr.
Thank you so much. Yes, so I host a podcast, Overcoming Working Mom Burnout, and I interview mums mostly, but they are HR experts, they're coaches, they're researchers, they're leaders in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So I'm trying to get all those different perspectives, all the layers. Like, a coach can help you personally. So I love, excuse me, hearing from the coaches. But I want to hear from the HR experts. How do we get into those corporations and start to shift the systems? What is the research telling us? And I love having those conversations, because one of the things was I kind of learned, hey, I don't have to have all the solutions myself. There are so many people out there with great ideas. And then for each guest, I create a behavior change plan, because that's so hard. Like, we can have all these fantastic ideas. And I think the same about TED. Like, TED is ideas worth spreading. But what about, how do we act on those ideas? And maybe that's my next TEDx talk. And I talk about it being like mission impossible, to be honest. You got to have a team of experts to help you. You know, you need an accountability partner. You need a role model. You need social support. You need to plan like a mission impossible team would have. You need gadgets to help you. There's so many things that make changing behavior hard. So yeah, that's really what I try to provide for all my guests. They have these great ideas, and then I say, okay, if you want to action this in your life or in your company, how do you actually do that? What are the cues you have to set up? What are the reinforcers and reminders you have to set up? How do you align this with your identity and your values? Because when you do that, it makes you want to do it more every single day. Even some tools like anchoring. So for example, having a behavior that you do every day and anchoring your changing behavior to that existing habit makes it easier. So if you've got a coffee every day, maybe just before you make your coffee or drink your coffee, you say, okay, that's when I'm going to do 3 minutes of mindfulness. And so the coffee every day is a reminder to do this other behavior. So that's really what I'm all about, is that behavior change. But I also think actually in the fall, I'm going to interview dads, because I think men and dads are such important allies in this process. Because like you said, you know, oh, it's mums that were helping the kids on Wednesdays. Why? It doesn't have to be. I mean, dads can bring so much. And I really value that about my husband. I'm the rule follower and he's not. And guess what? Our kids are learning both. So I want them to have that time with their dad. And I want him to be a dad when I'm not around, to sort of say, are you doing it the way I want you to do it? Let him be, let him do it his own way. That's so important for us mums to let go of that. So I'm going to interview dads. I'm going to interview my husband first. And one of the questions I'll say is, what's your favorite dad joke? My husband is so bad at these dad jokes. And I really want to learn from dads what they think the mums can do, what they think they can do. What did they learn from their mums if their mums worked? And what do they want for their daughters? And that was a question I asked in my TEDx talk. Dads, what do you want for your daughters? Because we really want this world to change. And I think that's what's so important, is being able to see what another group is experiencing. And obviously, as a white woman, educated white woman, I am still going through that journey to understand what women of color are experiencing. I have to try and understand to see the world from their experience and their point of view. And I think what we see, especially in the social media, is when women speak up about the pay gap, for example, the assumption is there isn't one. And that people are happy with the status quo. And it really, shame isn't the way to make that change. Shaming, saying, oh, you're part of this terrible system, or it's your fault. That's not the answer. But we really have to understand that what works for men, saying no, self-promoting, negotiating, those same things don't work for women, because stereotypically we are not seen to do those. And when we do those things, research shows we can be penalized. So for me, it's like, how do we have dads who are fantastic caregivers already step up into leadership positions? Because when they've done some of that full-time care, their mindset is already changed. So I want dads who have been stay-at-home dads or have really shared the parenting equally. I want them to become the leaders, because they will naturally make change. But I also want us to kind of work out, how do we see it from somebody else's point of view? And that's empathy. And that's what everybody is calling for in this point of time, is how can you see that what works for you does not work for somebody else in the same situation? Yeah. And so I think that's one of the questions to say is, why is what I do not working for them? And then that's when you can start to try and see things from their point of view and realize that we need to move to the side. We need to expand the pie so we can all be part of this, but we really need to let the light shine on other groups who don't have the same advantages and who have to act differently to get ahead, which is such a shame because we want to be ourselves, right?
Absolutely. One of my favorite parts of your TED Talk, like you've got so many really super high value both moments with solutions what you gave and the analogies what you gave, but at some point you were basically talking about men and women and equality and then you said, I hope I'm going to quote you correctly, but you said is that what you want for your daughters? Meaning the dads which are in the high hierarchy in companies which are like highly paid and everything, they are dads as well. And when you asked that question, I was like, wow, this is huge. It's like,
and one thing that I've definitely again seen in social media and experienced so much myself, and I just had a conversation with a woman leader last week. So we grew up knowing that there was nothing to stop us. We could work hard and we could succeed. And I think that's the message that most parents and dads will give to their daughters. Work hard and you will succeed. And in some ways, it's true. You will succeed. But the barriers that you have to face along the way exhaust you in that process. So women do get to leadership. I became, one of the top scientists in my field, but it had so many barriers along the way that I was exhausted in that process. And that exhaustion can lead to full burnout and having to leave. Or just then, once you're in that position of power, you don't have the energy to do the things you want to do. And I think it really comes to when women reach a point of life, maybe at midlife, when they're at that situation where they could be rising to the higher echelons of management. Like we did not think that there was anything that could get in our way. And then suddenly we realize, wow, it is. I spoke with a mom who was at the top of her field, left the workplace when she had kids, came back 2 years later, no time at all, could not get the same level of job nor the same level of pay. And you suddenly go, wow, there is this motherhood penalty. There is this maternal wall. None of us knew about it because we hadn't faced it to that point in time. And it's suddenly we feel like we become these staunch feminists, and we didn't want to be. We didn't believe that was what was needed, and I actually feel that's what, some of the guilt I feel is that's what I told all my female mentees when I was in academia. They'd come to me with these issues and the barriers they're facing, and I would say to them, the answer is work harder. And then I realized, that's not the answer.
No,
it really isn't. And when I think about that in terms of what businesses are doing at the moment, they're asking for more and more from their employees. If you work hard, you will succeed. It's like, yeah, but it's so draining. You become inefficient. And it's just like, it's not the answer. I mean, to say work smarter is also not necessarily like the way it's like, let's have different systems that allow us to be the most efficient, and the systems that are fair, that allow us all to have a chance to rise. And so it's just so fascinating to be in this space and start to talk about issues like motherhood and women's rights, never having thinking that I needed to in my life before. And also seeing some of the rancor, some of the pushback, motherhood seems to be a very triggering topic. mean, you talked about that Wednesday. Well, how did all the other employees feel that mums were getting the day off, and the whole company was accommodating mums? But again, if it was more often mums and dads equally doing it, then it wouldn't be this assumption that it is the mum's job. Again, if other employees, they may be in a situation sometime when they're a caregiver and they need the same flexibility and they would want to have that for themselves. But partly too, we can't deny, it's over 70% of workers are parents. So it's just partly an inevitability that we have to work out what to do. And I think what we feel that the other women and I that are working in this space is, if we make these accommodations for mothers, then all groups are going to enjoy the benefits of that. We're going to have more reasonable working hours. We're going to have a greater focus on well-being, and that's going to be good for everyone. If we have, because in the US here, there isn't paid leave for all caregivers. That's going to advantage everyone, because a CEO, it could be his wife that has cancer at some stage. It's not necessarily just parents that are going to benefit from this. But I think we have to be really respectful of that, because team members can be frustrated if somebody goes on maternity leave and they're left picking up the pieces. Whereas if we can think about that and plan for it more carefully, they can have it as an opportunity to gain new experiences and to grow. So it really is about recognizing everybody's role in this process and working together to make a more positive, healthy work environment. I mean, who doesn't want that?
Absolutely. We're gonna wrap up with this. So all of you watching, please follow Dr. Jacqueline Kerr on LinkedIn, where you can see what she posts. She posts every day amazing tips about burnout and different stories, and she's amazing in storytelling, as you heard already. Let us know where people can go to listen to your podcast.
Yes. So, I mean, my podcast is on all the podcasting platforms. So it's Overcoming Working Mum Burnout. And essentially, the best place to find all my resources is on my website. So if you go to Jacqueline Kerr, as you can see on the name here, drjacquelinekerr.com. That's my website. The podcast is there. I have blogs there. I do book reviews on burnout. I have articles and resources. Hopefully soon I'll be having a free guide to how you spot burnout in your employees. So yeah, please, use all that free information there on my website, and sign up for my newsletter so that you can get updates, because I'm constantly trying to learn how to frame this work, get more solutions, find out what works. That's really what I want to do, is apply my science, but have everybody's real life experiences, the examples of actually how do we do this and what succeeds. It's there where I want to get the solutions, the change, and we can. It just means we need as much support as possible. I think that's the thing. It's not the behavior change is impossible. It is challenging, and let's recognize that, right? Let's admit that all our New Year's resolutions, for the most part, fail, and just go, okay, that's the same in any workplace environment when we're trying to change the system. So what are all the things we can do together to support each other and make change? So thank you so much for this opportunity, Billy. I just love talking about this stuff, as you know.
Absolutely. Total, absolute passion, I have to say. And it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Please stay in the green room. For all of you who is watching right now, do contact Dr. Jacqueline Kerr if you think that you should be on her podcast, and if you've got something what you can share with her about burnout, or hire her to change your organization into a better well-being place. Thanks a lot, Jackie. I'm gonna see you in a second. For all of you watching, wishing you an amazing weekend. I'm sending you a lot of love and a lot of energy, and I'm gonna see you next Friday.